Jordan
I just
Peterson
turned us on, so go ahead.
Oh, the stream is live. Never mind.
Oh,
Never mind.
oh.
Actually, I maybe this, whatever, the internet. So Jordan Peterson is about to start his book tour for the book that hasn't even come out yet, right?
Right.
We Who Wrestle Against God is, and Chicago's one of his early dates. He's here in like mid-February, something like that. Why in the world you would want to come to Chicago in mid-February? Even I don't want to be here. But do you think that there is any way that we could reach out to him on behalf of our meetup group and either get a chance to talk to him or something like that? Because at this point, we're like a 4-year running Jordan Peterson meetup. And, but I don't know.
You can always try.
We can always try. Yeah.
I wouldn't give it a lot of,
wouldn't invest too much hope or
and if you look at that schedule, I mean, again, it's typical Jordan. It's like every other day, another city, and that's what he likes to do. He clearly likes to do. He's got his wife going with him often on this, and I mean, these are the kind of people that live on airplanes, and you're not going to see them on Delta. I guess your invite got lost in the mail. What kind of conservative Catholic are you, Luke?
What I am not a conservative Catholic, nor are you.
Where are the conservatives on this thing? I mean, it's just me and Sam.
Yeah, where are the other even guests?
Kale said he was there, and now he isn't. And I better drop the link in the email again, just to make sure that people can come. Well, let's get started.
Anything to say before we have Catholics on to defend themselves?
Well, what were your first impressions of, especially because you were, I mean, it was the Catholic. I posted on Twitter the picture of myself, Bethel, and Aaron. I mean, you were the guys that brought us all together. So what were your impression of Aaron's video?
I thought it was pretty right. He who calls us all the time sent that video to me as well. I think he sent it to both. I don't know if you got sent it multiple times. Hank sent me that video. I don't know.
Yeah. Hank is hard to ignore.
Hank is hard to ignore. Yeah. And of course, anything that makes Catholicism look good or talk about Catholic or Protestants converting to Catholicism will catch his attention.
That's true.
Although it wasn't. I mean, Aaron Wren wasn't necessarily the most flattering or positive in talking about this sort of conversion to Catholicism or Orthodoxy from Protestantism.
No.
But I mean, for the most part, it was describing something that everyone in this corner is very familiar with. But at the intellectual level, so why does it seem like intellectual conservative Catholicism has its act together more than any sort of institutionalized conservative Protestantism? I think that that's probably true, and that does jive with my experience in elite conservative Christian places. But it's not like the Protestants have no game. There is something, but I do think we're sort of outgunned. My basic thesis would be, and I'll mean this as a compliment, that Catholicism has done a better job by not splintering, of keeping the elite and the middle and the grassroots united in one institution and not allowing for schism and splintering, even though there are factions that might not like each other. They're at least technically underneath the same church. Whereas Protestantism, mostly because of the fundamentalist modernism fight in the early 20th century, and then the complete gap between the mainline and evangelicalism and fundamentalism on the other hand, has just made it harder for the grassroots of conservative evangelicalism or Protestantism to nourish the trees and the flowers that bloom into intellectuals. And so when you come to these elite institutions, there's basically no footprint on the ground from conservative evangelical institutions, aside from a couple campus fellowships that are doing better work than they get given credit for. But it's still, so I think really Protestantism's propensity to schism quicker than the Catholics do has sort of keeps causing the high-flying evangelicals to get cut off from their grassroots in a way that Catholics don't. That's as far as I can tell part of it. But I also really liked what Aaron said when, these Catholics do have a good apologetics game where they're like, look at these things that are Catholic. Oh, all of those other things, that's just American. It's like, well, what do you mean? All right, if we're going to do a fair accounting of what comes from Protestantism and what comes from Catholicism, we have to at least give the Protestants credit for all the things that they've done and not just call that liberalism or America or common sense or whatever you would attribute it to.
Yeah, but Sam, remember that Catholics weren't considered proper Americans until Kennedy said what he said in Houston in 1959, right? I mean, I think that's a significant part of this conversation. I mean, Catholics were always had dual loyalties to America, so I'm not terribly surprised then that that Wren's take was what it was, as sort of the voice. I mean, he knows. I mean, he knows what the mainstream and the main line was. I think Catholics did too. I think the story of Catholicism since Kennedy has been the desire to act out the truth of that claim, right? That Catholics can be as American as a Methodist, and I have my own sort of take on why I think that has probably been a bad Catholic play. But a priest friend of mine and colleague has always said, that never underestimate the desire of a Catholic, and especially a Catholic clergyman, to be accepted in the mainstream. And in my lifetime, I think there's been a very distinct generational divergence. If you look at sort of boomer prelates very much wanted to be of the spirit of Vatican II, and very much sort of in that John Courtney Murray-esque vein of, we can really be fully American too, right? Because if you call at the end of the 19th century, Americanism was an explicitly named heresy in the Catholic Church, right? So that in the mid-century with the Second Vatican Council, there was this moment where, no, we can be just as good, right? So the boomer priests sort of drank that deeply, and boomer Catholics drank that very deeply. In my generation, somewhere in the midst of the pontificate of John Paul II, especially toward the latter half or the middle to the latter half of it, a lot of Gen X priests and people like me realized that maybe the sort of the play to the mainstream was going to come at the expense of Catholic identity. And so I think what you're seeing playing out now in Catholic circles is, very much, the Gen Xers want to be conservative, and roughly speaking here, right, the Zoomers want to be trad, all in trad. Like, the heck with this Vatican II thing, the heck with this, sort of quasi-Lutheran liturgy. We want to go back to like bells, smells, verticality, all of that kind of those distinctives. So I don't know where I probably talked too much. That was sorry.
Well, I mean, yeah. If I can jump in, I had a student who was Catholic, and it wasn't a Catholic school, and so he felt sort of lonely. He was kind of surrounded by kind of very low Protestant kids, but he and I could always chat, because I followed the stuff that he followed. And he wasn't having like a crisis of faith or anything like that, but he was just very discouraged with all the, like he would rant about guitar masses, that Francis and this and that. So he would kind of think out loud, like, yeah, I don't know, maybe when I grow up, I'll try to find an ordinariate church or something, you know. And I just felt bummed because, you know, here's this kid, you know, super bright, you know, like every Catholic mama, you know, would want to have a bright young Catholic kid like this. And the church is, you know, edging him out by doing stupid stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the sort of the acceleration. I mean, you can sort of look at the decade of Francis's pontificate as a kind of accelerationist project to basically do a kind of radical A/B test between, you know, trad or not, right? So they sort of burrowing out this sort of this middle ground that I grew up in, which was kind of conservative. You know, there's these two schools of post-conciliar theology. There's the concilium school and the ressourcement school, right? And the concilium is basically progressive, and the ressourcement is basically a kind of progressive retrieval of traditionalisms, right? So it's not entirely neat, but basically John Paul II, Benedict XVI were sort of conservative, progressive traditionalists, right? And Francis has been sort of more in the line of John the 23rd, Paul VI, as a kind of, you know, it's a new day, it's new springtime, you know, we're going to out with the old, and we're going to sort of
Screw
do
the
a new
Latin
thing.
Mass.
Yeah. So, yeah, and so I think that's why American conservative Catholics, this establishment that Paul you mentioned in your videos, you know, I think that's why they're so flat-footed and unsure as to how to even comment on the Francis pontificate, because it had been brought up in this school of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, which basically said that, you know, no, the proper interpretation of the Second Vatican Council is not rupture, but continuity. Now, you can play all kinds of games with those words, rupture and continuity, and good Lord, we could do that forever, but it would bore everybody. But that's basically it, right? And so Francis seems to be, I mean, very clearly, I'm not even going to play dance games anymore, but Francis is very much of the sort of the hermeneutics of disruption, that Vatican II is a radically new thing. Right, there is not, you know, and so you'll hear some lip service to continuity type things, but ultimately, by his appointments and by his projects, he's clearly wanting to do Vatican II for real.
I've seen people joke that he's the first Episcopalian Pope.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's, and you'll hear both trads and conservatives be like, look, you know, we're not really sure what Francis is doing. I mean, it looks to us like he's just doing, like you said, a kind of version of, you know, Anglicanism or something like that. Again, no offense to my Anglican friends. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect, but that's really sort of been the thing, right? So they've looked at the liberalization, say, of the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Episcopalians and everybody in this country, right? Which spawned the original rift, right, with evangelicals away from the main line. You know, the Catholics are sort of sitting like, well, they tried it. Like they really did. They really did give it a go, and it doesn't seem to have worked. So why do we think that we're going to sort of make this thing work? And oh, by the way, there's this thing called the deposit of faith that you're kind of pretending doesn't exist anymore. So again, I'm not sure how accurate that is. I'm just sort of giving voice to sort of the feeling of people who care about these sorts of things.
Kale, I was going to ask if you read the novel A Canticle for Leibowitz.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to. I introduced a young friend of mine to it for the first time. Where it's very, that's a real boy. I wish I could read this again for the first time. But,
yeah, that's so true.
So just, you know, for people who aren't familiar, it's a classic sort of dystopian Catholic novel, and it's all about nuclear holocaust. So there's a nuclear holocaust, which, you know, wipes civilization off the map, and it has to be rebuilt. So the world it's cycling through the new Dark Ages, the new Enlightenment, and then the new futurism.
Yeah, it's funny. You hear podcasters talking about speed running, you know, using a video game motif, but Canticle Leibowitz is speed running Western Civ.
Yeah,
right? After the apocalypse.
It's absolutely fascinating, and the constant is this little monastery out in the desert of the American West, and it's just still there. Like, no matter what happens, the monks are still doing their thing, preserving the flame of the church. And it's an utterly tragic novel to read now, because it's sort of built on this sort of Platonic ideal of Catholic basedness. It's just like, it's all about what you want the Catholic Church to be, right? Like the priests are fighting for Catholic social teaching. They're telling people not to kill themselves, even if they're suffering from radiation poisoning. They, like, and then at the end, they go into outer space and they're going to preserve the church in space. So, and like, there's a pope, and you just assume that this pope is like this rock solid conservative trad guy. And so, but, and my young friend is not Catholic, but he said, man, I almost want to become Catholic now after reading this, even though I'm a Baptist, because, the vibes, it's sacrament and all that stuff. But then you kind of stumble back out into the real world, and it's Francis, it's the guitar masses, it's James Martin, it's the synod and synodality.
Right. That's right.
And it's like, there is no unified church anymore. There's the pretense of unity, but it's really just as all over the place as any Protestant denomination.
Right. And I think that's the dark night that a lot of conservatives and trads are kind of facing right now. And I'd be lying if I say that I'd include myself, right? That, I sort of call it bulwarkism, the kind of bulwarkism that made me fall back in love with the church after a kind of teenage rebellion against the church, was that it was like the thing, like it was, almost a kind of instantiation of a Platonic form. And if I could just hew myself to it, then I could weather all of the inanities and the absurdities and the contradictions of modernity. And so I think what you're seeing, Paul, you probably see a lot of this actually in this little corner. And I think this has also been a great boon for, our Orthodox friends, because basically people held on to the sort of the claims of what the church made about herself. And now they're looking at, but it doesn't look like, as Bethel has just sort of rattled off all the things that, again, a kind of based Zoomer is looking at this like, this doesn't pass the sniff test. Why are you keep shoving James Martin in my face? Like, I thought this stuff actually mattered. So then all of a sudden, if my ecclesiology is blown up to smithereens, and this is just bad theologies all over the place, why don't I just go find like a really great, weird, super like cosmic liturgy, like, Eastern Orthodoxy, because I tried the Latin Mass and that got ripped away from me brutally, by the way. And so I think that is, again, I'm starting to realize that maybe nobody really believes in theology. Maybe really it is, you brought up the vibe word, Bethel, but I think that maybe vibes actually are the thing ultimately. And we just sort of retrofit a theology to make sense out of it.
Now, the purpose of the stream isn't necessarily to host the particular miseries of the current state of civil war in American Catholicism, which is a perennial war, it seems. But the part of how this came up is, for me, we're in this moment where Rob Reiner, Phil Visser, David France, Kristen Kobes-Dumais all decide to get together to make a movie to save America from Christianity, and especially from dread Christian nationalists. When then I'm watching the Ren video, and it's like, oh, those sneaky Catholics. That's like the old Jesuit playbook, And here everybody's pointing to, all the people on January 6th in the Washington Mall with crosses and Jesus stuff, and it's the Catholics behind the whole thing.
Well, and I was going to comment, to be fair. So, like you mentioned, the sneaky Catholics sneaking onto the Supreme Court, that kind of thing. There is also a ton of hate for those justices. I mean, like when Amy Coney Barrett was going through her hearings, you saw, there's the anti-Catholic prejudice coming out. So it will come out of the woodworks whenever it's a focus
that mostly
of the
come
discourse.
From Catholics now, because it was also occurred to me that Catholics are sort of like Muslims now. I mean,
or the don't make me look bad. I go to Catholic church, but I'm not Amy Coney Barrett.
Right? Well, those people aren't really Catholic.
it depends what you mean by really Catholic. You're more likely, if you go to a Catholic church, you're more likely to meet someone like that than you are to meet someone
I'm more Catholic than those people.
Right. I mean, do we want to talk about, devout Catholic Joe Biden? I mean, do we really want to descend into this?
Right,
right. So, but I think what Bethel brings up is actually a good point. But Sam, I think your rebuttal is right. Look, they go to a Catholic church. Like, what? How am I supposed to parse these? Like, what kind of glasses should I wear so that I can filter out the real and the unreal? Maybe
it's a little bit, maybe Judaism could be
actually
an analogy.
That's
because
interesting.
I mean, I think identity is really interesting. I think there's a tendency for people to say, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm Catholic," in a little bit the same way people say, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm Jewish."
Right. It's almost. I was just going to say there's an ethnic overlay. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Which again, converts are like completely, and so for me it's weird because I'm half Jewish, right? So it's so like Zeldon's a
on
Jewish
your mom's
name.
side or your dad's side?
My dad's side, so I know it doesn't count, but but at any rate, and that was very much part of our identity, like the extended Zeldon family in Louisiana, like we were Jewish. Nobody ever darkened synagogue, right? I mean, but we were Jewish, very much in the way that you see Eric and Brett talk about it. More Eric than Brett, to be fair, right? But so it was like, nobody like believes in any of this stuff, but like this is what we are. And so, so like my dad, when he converted to Catholicism after he married my mom and after my older brother was born, that was like a dark sheep of the family moment. Like they never treated him the same way because he was a traitor, right, to tribe. And so for me, as a kind of half Catholic, whatever you want to call that, this ethnic overlay has always made no sense to me because I was already kind of like a mutt anyway.
I mean, Catholics
try leaving the Catholic Church. And see how your relatives treat you, including your own parents, after you left the Catholic Church. There is that same sort of ethnic bristling of against the apostates who dare suggest leaving. But I think it's similar to what Paul's experiencing in the CRC. There are the ethnic Dutch people who feel like this is their birthright, and that their identity within the church trumps whatever propositions we think we're actually going to come down on at the end of the day. Let's be real, that's deeper than the propositions. And there are way more Catholics who think that way than there are Dutch CRC people.
And in this summer, we all saw that, with the clip that Paul brought out, an extended clip in which the female pastor gets up and says, is there a place for my gay son? Who was that, Paul? Was there a place for my gay son in our church?
It doesn't even have to be just a son who can't abide being in a church that would exclude gays.
That's right. Like that is again, it's like you're not making a theological argument. Actually, it's just weird. I don't know. You know what I'm saying, Paul? It's like it's a version of that you're not making a confessional, even though it's saying my son can't abide to be in a church who would suggest that sex matters, right? But it's a family. I don't know. It's complicated.
Well, it's like how could you tell those sorts of people that they aren't Catholic, right? They're like, what the heck are you talking about? My ancestors have been Catholic since St. Patrick scared away the snakes. Right. So, how dare you? At some point,
problem is
no matter what we believe or what we do or how we behave, that part of our identity is deeper than anything you have the right to criticize me over. And I have some sympathy for what they're saying. I know where that idea comes from, and I've seen that up close.
I mean, you understand it psychologically, but I mean, Catholicism isn't, in fact, the same as Judaism. I mean, there can be a meaningful sense in which somebody can be Jewish without believing anything, because it is the ethnicity. There's an ethnic thing going on there that there really isn't. At just saying, well, my family are all Irish or whatever. I mean, that's not the same thing,
Well, I think one thing that I think is interesting is zooming out a little bit in time and thinking about this, because the spicy comment I left in the video was basically to the tune of the WASPs had way more reasons to distrust the Catholics prior to Vatican II than we're capable of imagining really very well, unless we separate ourselves from our current post-Vatican II historical age. And that it wasn't just ethnic or denominational prejudice, although there was that. Like, the WASP didn't like the Irish when they started coming over. That is true. But there was more to it than just that in the Protestant establishment distrusting Catholicism, because Catholicism we also have to remember America once upon a time was puny and weak and was scared that the old world would come and take it back over and ruin the experiment that it had started. And it felt very vulnerable to that. And for good reason. And we had a Catholic front up in Quebec and a Catholic front down in Mexico. And that wasn't a joke. And that we were scared that the Spanish or whoever could come and try and take away democracy from us Protestants who had worked so hard and had put so much on the line to risk this experiment. And it's only now that we think America is invincible. That's laughable. But America was not always invincible. Democracy was not always just assumed. And that so many of the assumptions built into democracy and American democracy are so Protestant to the core that Catholicism was striking right at the core of those ideals, and that there was a decent amount of, I would even say, justified civilizational fear of old world Catholicism coming back and taking American democracy away from the Americans.
Yeah, that's true. That's historically true. And what's interesting about this now is, now with the recession of modernity, the Enlightenment, a bunch of these things. I mean, one Orthodox person on Twitter is like, why do you have any Orthodox here? And it's like, they're not even in the conversation in America. They are but this Christian national conversation, though, is, I think James Lindsay was right that, this is a number that's being done on a bunch of conservative Protestants that haven't quite thought this through. There's a number of other conservative Protestants that are going to say, you want to label with this? You want to label this? You want to call me this? Really? You really want to give me this label? You want to give us this label? You want to have this fight? That's sort of Doug Wilson's thing. But have you guys,
have you been following the Dusty Deavers win in Oklahoma?
No, I don't know who Dusty Deaver is.
Oh, okay. This is relevant. So Dusty Deavers is a pastor who ran for the Oklahoma Senate, and he just won. He had an upset victory. So if you look up clips of these guys' speeches, his speeches are sermons. He's just bringing it. He's just coming up and delivering these kind of fire and brimstone political speech sermons, and people are pointing to this guy here we go, it's happening, the Christian nationalist takeover, so yeah.
But there's so much in here in terms of the WASPy Protestants were able to sort of, there's no establishment, there's no church establishment at the federal level, and the states sort of put them away at the beginning of the 19th century. But the Protestants were able to sort of say, we're just going to do a lot of winking because we really do all have the same culture and we really do all have the same goals, at least close enough. And we can fight about the details. But when it's all said and done, this is sort of our platform and our program. And it's, in the middle of the 20th century, it's so funny listening to Steven Pinker laud the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah,
and I'm just thinking,
yeah. Well, it struck me.
Those waspy Protestants, they smuggled that sucker hard.
Well, it's so shocking to me. I was listening to that on the car. I had to drive some students up to Boston for the break today to the airport, and I was listening to you, Paul, and I am amazed at how much of a straw man history those guys have to make the kind of claims that they make about, well, now we we believe we should think about our problems and apply thinking to our problems. And you just go, good Lord, do you know the straw man that you have created for the entire history of humankind? And you're going to say that this was sort of burped out in the last half second of human time? Just amazing. Just amazing.
So, but we're at this moment now where, okay, the Wasps, they went from lions to foxes, and
Right.
you know, and I'm listening to the rest is history, the Bay of Pigs. You know why? I mean, Kennedy's really sort of at the cusp here of so many things, because he's the first Catholic president, but he's darn waspy, and he spends most of his time in England.
Amen.
He's his father. You know, I mean,
and at New England boarding schools, right? I mean,
yes.
like that's a real thing. He did not see the thing that nobody remembers about Kennedy is he was not educated in Catholic schools, which was very parochial, very ethnic, very tribal. His father was a social climber from the get-go. Rose was not. She was very much very pious and devout, actually devout Kennedy. But you know, his entire formation, I mean, his entire formation was WASP. He was for all intents and purposes a WASP.
Yes. But you've got so many things, because his father, of course, would, in some ways, people would look at his father and say, yeah, that's a Catholic. Mm-hmm. He's not faithful to his wife. He's slick in business. Yeah. You know, he's looking to grab power. He sure wants to have one of his sons be president.
He's in cahoots with his ethnic co-members against the establishment, and will cut them better deals than he'll do with us. And
that's how he made his fortune, right? I mean, they gained prohibition to create their fortune.
Right, which was the WASP establishment trying to get rid of alcohol, and so they're taking advantage of the weaknesses caused by the overstretch of power of prohibition.
There's a quote that I heard. I no longer remember who said it, but was talking about the young Kennedy before he had become president, and said, "We will package him up and sell him like soap." Like, it was this very cynical, but that's exactly what happened, isn't it? You know.
He wasn't as packaged as well as George W. Bush. George W. Bush was really well packaged.
That's also true. Yeah.
But Kennedy, of course, has all of those things right in him, and also the change from, I mean, if you looked at that one video about the ARC conference, you have the lions and the foxes, and the lions are the ones to say, we are large and in charge. We know how to do civilization. We know how to do culture, and we are going to show you how to do culture. And in some ways, the Orthodox, the Catholics, and then these waspy Protestants could play the role of the lion. And then in the counterculture, you have this movement, this transformation into foxes, where it's very much the therapeutic, but it is also, it is this different kind of control where it's not, you're going to do it our way, or we're going to marginalize you and put you in jail. No, it's much more Gavin Newsom, where, I mean, Gavin Newsom is the whitest dude in town. I mean, look at him and his wife and his kids. They are as privileged white as you're ever going to find, but you wrap yourself in this cloak of multiculturalism and all of this wokish stuff, and it's like, oh, that's
Justin Trudeau.
That's Trudeau. That's the genius Fox move. No,
that's right.
We're not even, Canada isn't even a nation. We're just a movement of diverse people from around the world who are trying to love the planet as best we can. Shut the hell up, you truckers. I mean, this is
Here's a picture of me in an Indian costume for me.
That's right.
Well, so, Paul, can I just ask, so how are you making sense of this in the context of this movie, this Rob Reiner movie featuring all of our favorite evangelical main stars? Like,
well, evangelicals for a long time, and I've certainly done this plenty in my own life. In many ways, evangelicals have tried to be the least offensive foxes on the block. Christianity isn't a religion; it's a relationship.
Yeah.
And we're not
fundamentalist. We're evangelical.
Right. We don't really have a church. We're just having an estuary. We're in a movie theater, and we're
with concert and a message and a TED Talk.
That's right. A concert and a TED Talk. That's right. And we'll play whatever music you like. We'll put Jesus in it. Yeah. But of course, that's a certain packaging of Jesus too. Jesus is the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. And Jesus wouldn't be mean. I mean, that is the Jesus that is out there in terms of when people look at the church, say they're not like Jesus, they're mean. It's like, Yeah, you haven't really read that gospel book too much when Jesus talks about things like whitewashed tombs and
but you see, Paul, Jesus was speaking to the super conservative Pharisees,
right?
That's right.
So that kind of stuff is okay. That's what we're doing, because we're also talking to the super conservative Pharisees. So we're just like Jesus.
The Jewish nationalists,
right.
Yeah.
So then when the Unheard,
the Jewish nationalists.
So then when the Unheard guy, the Unheard people go to San Francisco and are looking around at San Francisco, and they go to the city council person, and he's still trying to defund the police, and it's like, whoa, that's a bold move, buddy. When basically the businesses are leaving your city and you're watching what's happening in these American West Coast cities, and so now you've got a very interesting moment where you've got a very interesting alignment of the lions, or the would-be lions, the Orthodox, even though they're not players on the American political scene at all, the Catholics, who are sort of, are they the brains behind the scene? Are they the ones holding the strings? The evangelicals that are the ones out there in the street, catching crap for being dread Christian nationalists. But we are at the moment where there's this, and Ayan Hirsi Ali has pointed this out for, more than most people, because she comes and says, why don't you Westerners preserve the stuff that I came for, the stuff that put you on top of the heap in the world? Mm-hmm. And it's like, and so then of course Jacob is always, yelling at me to be a lion, basically. And it's like, yeah, but you got to understand, there's also something to this Fox strategy that has really, in many ways, won.
There's something else going on in that trailer, which there's a very strong racial element to this. So notice the voices that they're propping up as the good voices, right? These are black voices, liberal black voices, and I mean the one guy. If you look him up, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. He's the guy, I think he gets the last line. But this is a guy who will show up at political rallies in his, priestly
vestments,
right? And I mean, if you want to talk about Christian nationalism, go to the black church.
Yeah. It's unreal. It's unreal.
Yeah, like listen to the way they're fusing, the political with the spiritual, right from the pulpit, right from the the political. And so I think what's happening with some strains of white Protestantism is like, oh, okay, why can't we play that game? So that's why I brought up Devers in Oklahoma. The kind of stuff that he's saying now that he's won his Senate seat, you could do like a side by side with things that some black politicians have done. It's really not any different,
Well, it's also helpful to understand that part of the reason that, first of all, black Protestants are really sort of a different thing from a lot of the white Protestants, just because of the way their institutions had to develop. Because the church, for many, I mean, part of the reason Martin Luther King Jr. came up through the church was kind of the only institution they could have. I mean, they could really be theirs. And so those dynamics in the black church are very different. And but the little spat, the hilarious thing to me is that you get this book, Jesus and John Wayne, and this long litany of, these horrible Christians that have their politics and religions all mixed up together. And it's like, everybody's politics and religion are connected in some ways. It's just the different nuances of the connection. And so now we come to a point in time where the WASPs can, it's sort of Girardian, where the scapegoat doesn't work anymore. And so the sort of waspy trick doesn't work anymore. And we're at this point where suddenly you're going to have a religious belief. You're going to have to sort of, you can't anymore just say, I don't have a religion. I mean, that's going away. I mean, even the atheists are admitting that now.
Maybe even especially admitting it now, which is really fascinating to me as an observer.
Right. So suddenly we're at this moment where, which in many ways we've been trying to avoid since the 30 Years' War, where we're no longer going to fight over metaphysics.
Right. Yeah. So I was thinking you were talking about this, and I wrote myself a note on the drive. That whole game was an attempt to solve for violence, right? And so then everything becomes a kind of proxy war for violence, right? We're no longer, literally, lining up, green team versus orange team or what have you on the field in Flanders or something, right? But so then in America, all that gets kind of transposed here, right? So it's like, so if it was then trying to an attempt to solve for violence, and it basically worked, but as we all know, that there's no such thing as a solution, that yesterday's solution bears today's problem, right? And so then what are we attempting to solve for now if we once attempted to solve for violence? Are we trying to solve for meaning? Are we trying to solve for power? Right, because power is not the same thing as violence. Like, that's what I've been chewing on all morning long. It's like, what are we now trying to solve for?
I think we're trying to answer the question about human nature. I mean, you yourself said it in previous live stream, Kale. Mm-hmm. The real question is now, what is a human being? Yeah, that's where the meaning crisis has brought us.
Right.
And that's why you're winding up with religious answers, because that is the level of analysis where you answer that question. What am I?
Right. And what was it, the Peter Thiel video you were doing the other day with Millerman? You were saying that they put the question, because it was just too hot, right? They put the question of what does it mean to be a human being on the side burner. Interesting, of course, because then it births the 20th century, in which it turns out that, if you're not going to insist that there's a shared human nature that we have to fight over, then we'll just blank out whole swaths of people that we don't care for, right? Because if there's no shared human nature. So I think that's are we still in that, or is this a different phase?
Well, go ahead, Sam.
It's all Unitarianism's fault.
Ooh, I love it.
Is what I'll say. So much Unitarianism, liberalism, and the Enlightenment are all basically the same thing. And that the first liberal government in Europe was in Poland from about 1560 to 1650. People forget this, but the Unitarians were being chased around after Michael Servetus was burnt, and some Unitarians in Italy, they were trying to figure out a safe place that they could go. They went to Poland because they found some sympathetic princes, and there was a Unitarian not anti-theocracy in Poland for a while that says, how about we don't fight each other? How about we don't kill each other over theology? How about we don't do the thing where the prince just gets to decide what religion everyone underneath him is in this new post-Protestant Reformation thing? And there was about 100-year religious peace in Poland that was mostly because the Unitarians were very influential at the top, but they were still a pretty small minority. So if you're a small minority who thinks that other kinds of Christians are fine, just mistaken, but knows that the other Christians will kill you if they get the chance and they have the power, what sort of government do you build? You don't build your own theocracy, because that will turn the people against you. You build a liberal government. And you try and instill the value of toleration and pluralism on broader Christian assumptions. Okay, Sweden invaded Poland. The Catholics rise up, retake over Poland. The Unitarians have to run to England, and they run to John Locke's house, basically. And John Locke loved the Polish immigrants from the escaping Polish Unitarian immigrants. He's like, oh, what kind of government did you have? That's fascinating. I didn't know about that. Let me philosophize about this for a little bit and write some books. And then, then the Unitarians escape over to North America. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, etc., are reading them, soaking up as much John Locke as they can get. And that is where Unitarianism and liberalism and the Enlightenment are all basically the same thing. Liberalism is Unitarian political theology, is really what it is. And
that's interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
And what I think happened is that Unitarianism takes over Harvard in like the 1810s or something like that.
Right.
And then from there it keeps spreading. And what the deal that Unitarianism made with the devil at this point in time was like, we will open ourselves up to new discovery, to new ideas and new learning on the faith that this will go in a good direction, and that we will even sacrifice in some sense the identity that we are now to be transformed into the identity of wherever this path of progress and enlightenment is headed, who knows where, in exchange for the fact that we get to control the reins of this horse. We don't know where the horse is going, but we get the reins, and it's going to be here from Boston.
You're better on being the rein side than in front where there's all the trampling going on.
And what I think is happening is that really is the trajectory of American theology and stuff like that, is wherever Boston basically decided to go from there. And what's interesting is like the stuff that's going on at Harvard now is like the end of that. It's like come to some logical conclusion where it was so self-emptying, so tolerant, so willing to take in things from outside itself, that eventually, and for a while that gave it so much power, because if you can take things from outside of yourself without losing yourself, you can gain the power from the outside. And America is nothing if not the thing that is incredibly good at strengthening itself by gaining power from taking things from the outside. But it has finally come to the place where it like ate its own tail and is killing itself. And I think that's really what's happening, is that the Unitarian bargain with the devil that happened sometime in Cambridge in the early 1800s has played itself out, and we still don't really know what's going to come next after that. Anyway, that's my says the Sam Adams, the Unitarian.
So we have to kill Sam as our scapegoat, and the world will be better.
It's Jonah. He's telling us to throw him off the ship.
That's right.
Or maybe only a Unitarian can fix it. I don't know. One of the two.
So I'm intrigued by this trajectory, though. I would just, there's probably a little bit more zigging and zagging up that line than a sort of a straight one, right? Because you look at like that mid-century, right? If you look at the mid-century of the 19th century rather than the 20th, and you look at the responses, you have sort of like normie poets, and then you have the kind of the weirdo poets, and it's important that we remember that somebody like Hawthorne and Melville were definitely like the weirdo poets. They did not play well with the Boston establishment, even though they later kind of got adopted as sort of native sons, but it's really not accurate. And they went in a sort of decidedly, whatever English teachers will call this like dark romanticism or whatever. I'm not sure how helpful that is, but they recognize the weak gruel of Unitarianism, say of like the ascended Emersonian vision, right? They were like, this dude's he's a interestingly enough, he's kind of like
Emerson was the son of a Unitarian pastor.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, no, and prominent, but he was a rock star. I mean, Emerson was a rock star, and like very much the way that Peterson is a rock star. Yeah. So he's sort of, so Peterson does.
Kale, how did you divert the discussion into blaming all this on Unitarians?
I
do it sophistry at its best.
We were talking about JFK earlier. JFK is the perfect example of the Unitarians being like, we know that you really deep down want to be like us. So in exchange for you becoming like us, we'll let you in and you get to be powerful, but you have to change who you are to become compatible with our thing. And that is like a symbol of what I would call the denominationalization of Catholicism, where instead of being a civilizational threat to American democracy, it becomes a Christian denomination that is propping up democracy instead of threatening it, and gets to be another church on the city square next to all the
Right.
other ones.
Right. Well, I guess, you know, if you look at those guys, if you trace those family lines, you know, like I don't think I'm wrong with it. I think Hawthorne's daughter converts to Catholicism in like the late 1860s, 70s, like post Civil War. Like, and there's this interesting way in which these early Americans who sort of became wealthy in the Boston area, you know, they started sending their kids to Europe, right? Which again, if you would have told the Puritans of the Mayflower, your descendants are going to become wealthy and go back to Europe and look at all the churches and be impressed. And anyway, they would send their kids to Europe, right, for culture. Right, you know, to get them some culture. It's very similar to the way that we send kids, you know, for college, you know, a year abroad or what have you. And what is interesting is that, you know, then the American establishment kind of breaks sort of two ways. They kind of lean into sort of post-Unitarian liberalism, or they become kind of like weird and sort of crypto-Catholic. It's a really fascinating move. It's almost like those are your choices, right? In this sort of and I hate to sort of be overly simplistic, but there's something, you know, missing that they see in Europe, even if they don't have any access to it because it's no longer their tribe, it's no longer their people. You know, so like the entire, you know, body of work of somebody like Henry James is all about like the American girl encountering, you know, the cynical European man. Right. And it sort of becomes this super, allegory of, you know, new world feminine and old world masculine and the kind of, you know, decadence that ensues and, or, you know, anyway, something like that. But it's sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, another thought I had about Europe, maybe this is sort of going in a different direction, but I mean, Europe is also considered to be the seat of higher criticism in the 19th century.
But German, right? German's so different, you know, versus the Italian thing.
And Harvard was a close follower on the higher criticism. Because that was what I got out of the book that you made me read, Paul. One of the what's his name? The Orange Book. Higher ed, American higher ed. Your historian guy that you always like.
George Marsden.
Marsden. I mean, basically, you know, every mainline Protestant minister went to Germany to learn how to be Hegelian, and part of that whole movement. That was really news to me.
Schleiermacher too.
That was really news to me. Yeah, I'm using Hegel as shorthand, but you're right. Sorry, you know, but that was really news to me because that is not like the sort of the Catholic genealogy. You know, like that's definitely a Protestant thing that I did not understand until reading that Marsden book.
When my dad was a grad student in philosophy in Vanderbilt, this would have been, let's see, my dad was born in 65, so this would have been early
80s.
Yeah, early 90s because you.
So sorry.
Yeah. So Heidegger was all the rage.
Yeah.
And he tells a story on himself that like one day he was walking past the lounge and he heard some girls gabbling about Heidegger. And then they were also talking smack about Descartes at the same time. And my dad was a big Descartes stan, and so like he saw red and just like lit into these Heidegger fangirls. So anyway, but yeah, I mean the continental philosophy then very much got transported to the States, and so now, you know, when you talk about philosophy, you really have to get specifically where are we talking about? Are we talking about the analytical strain or the continental strain?
Paul, you posed the point that I think people got a little upset about this, and I think Nate kind of got upset with you. Not upset, but that's being silly. But anyway, Nate pushed back and
hopefully
said,
Nate will come on a little later. He couldn't come on right away.
Yeah,
so
you know, you were saying that, you go to DC and you see all of this Catholic infrastructure. And I'm wondering if you could sort of reset the deck for us on that one, and, you know, maybe that might help part of this conversation.
Well, I put it, Bethel sent out a piece from Ad Fontes
It's a good piece. Yeah.
It is a good piece. And so Nate basically said, oh, that was true in 1992, but I don't think so. I was having a conversation. Who was I talking to? It wasn't online, with someone about that. There is something to what Sam, before you two jumped on, where Sam and I sort of started. There is something to the effect of keeping everything within an institution that strengthens things. Now, I was talking to Hank about this. So it's funny. Evangelicalism is like a network. It's intended to be more like the internet. It's sort of, you don't have to go to the same church. You don't have to agree on baptism. You don't have to, almost, you don't even have to agree on the Trinity. And so evangelicalism is sort of this network that everyone can sort of come into. All you need is an IP address and you can participate in it. Catholicism is a different thing. It's within an institution. The Christian Reformed Church, I think, tried in the middle of the 20th century, when the Calvin philosophy department was at its heyday, when it had Mao and Waltersdorf and Plantinga and Marsden was teaching there. Calvin in the 60s and 70s tried to sort of, we're going to do what the Catholics do and we're going to do it in-house. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, Plantinga goes to Notre Dame.
Right.
Marsden, he would spend some time at Notre Dame, but and they all go out to the bigger places. Mao becomes president of Fuller, and you basically have the sense that
in Southern California.
Yeah, Mao was president of Fuller.
That's really interesting. I didn't know. That's really interesting.
Mao, if you listen to Mao, Chad would love Mao. Went through AA, gained sobriety. Also has ministerial credentials. Richard Mao's a super interesting guy. We wanted to have him in Chino, but he had a conflicting. That would have been a fascinating thing to have Mao with Vervaeke and Pajot. But so Calvin tried it. The CRC tried to do it. The CRC's it's an aspiring thing,
and it was succeeding for a while.
Yeah.
Don't sell yourself short. It was doing better than any other Protestant institution at that, as far as I could tell.
But then I think your point is that it's scattered. Then,
right?
Like,
it was prone to schism.
Yeah,
and in a way that the Catholics are less prone to schism.
Yeah, but I think that's over. It's just somebody from the inside of the Catholic thing. I think that y'all look at us as if we're way more unified than is.
Do not underestimate our ability to schism.
No.
You do not know how further you can get in that direction.
But Sam, what Kale is saying don't underestimate the Catholic ability to schism either.
Right. So I can ask you one question. Like, let's say I'm in a room of 100 graduates of a Catholic. They have a college degree from a Catholic institution, right? Let's say there are 100 of them in the room. And, I can line everybody up and I can pretty accurately ask them where they got their degree from and maybe even ask them what they studied. And I can tell you without knowing anything else, whether or not they still practice the faith. Okay. So you asked earlier, Sam, what is like a definition of a Catholic? To me, I don't think you can answer it singularly. I think you can't even answer it within a family, but you have to think of it in terms of 3 generations, right? Mm-hmm. So like the thing that keeps me up every day is that I want to pass on the faith to my children as it was passed on to me. I'm a little bit of an outlier. I was born in the 70s, right? And I'm one of 3 boys, and all 3 of us are still practicing Catholics. That is just a absolute outlier, right? Just on the numbers. Like my younger brother is actually a second career. He's in the seminary right now. He's studying to be a priest. Okay. And so my mom's faith given to her by her mom and her father, has sort of lives in us. And, for me, it's my faith is almost not real unless my children take it up. Now, the forces and the pressures are aligned against me, right? But I know that there are certain things that I can do. to make my kid not Catholic, right? And one of them is to send my children to almost any Catholic college. Almost any.
Wow.
Well, send them to Hillsdale. It's
Well,
like
no, well, you laugh. No, you laugh, Sam, but like literally that's on my short list. Right.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would keep me from sending my kid to Hillsdale is just money. Like that's it. Because at this point, if you don't go, I'm going to name a couple of colleges here. People in the comments can say what they want, but like University of Dallas, Thomas Aquinas College, maybe a Christendom, maybe a Steubenville, maybe Thomas More College. They're literally like less than 10. And most of these are micro colleges. Okay. But like, I think it is a miracle if you send your kid to Boston College and they remain Catholic. Like I
or
really
Georgetown
do.
or Notre Dame.
Yeah. Oh God. Notre Dame, you've got a better shot. Again, there are certain sort of specific culture. Hey, Nate, there are certain specific cultural things that Notre Dame has been able to kind of maintain that make, if you want to be Catholic at Notre Dame, you can be Catholic and remain Catholic. Okay. But at most other places, I just don't think that's the case. Nate, I don't know, did you hear the front end of that part?
I was at a work meeting, so.
Sorry. I was basically telling these guys
Kale is
that,
dunking on Catholic colleges.
right, they're talking about like the unity of the Catholic Church and never underestimate the Catholics, the Protestants' ability to schism, and I get all that, and that's a sort of also kind of a funny Catholic inside joke. But I was just trying to tell them that what might appear as sort of this sort of unified thing on the outside is really it couldn't be farther from the truth.
For me, my Catholic college experiences, it was at one of the most unambiguously Catholic colleges.
Yeah, and I know where you went. And
I went to Thomas Aquinas College.
Yeah, and I went to Thomas More College back in the day, so it's a similar vibe. Like most of my friends,
just stick with colleges with Thomas in the name. Be safe.
Yeah, that's right. So but our experiences, that was an outlier experience, right, Nate? Yeah, very much so. So anyway, my example of the 100, people with a college degree from Catholic universities in America, I can line you up and I can have a pretty good chance of telling you about whether or not they are practicing Catholics or not. And
what's your definition of a practicing Catholic?
Right. Well, I mean, the baseline is you go to Mass on Sundays. Like that's our obligation. We're supposed to go, and we're supposed to go to confession at least once a year, hopefully during the Easter season.
So the Pope is Catholic.
Yes.
How about Joe Biden? Is he Catholic?
Again, I can't pretend. I don't know what he says in confession, but I have a hard time with that one personally, just because I think his political commitments are ultimately counter. He's not the only one, and he's not the only one. There's plenty on the right that could qualify for similar raised eyebrows on my part, but I just don't see.
Who was the bishop who refused communion to Nancy
Cordileone?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think that was completely appropriate to
right. And of course, but again, all of the mainstream Catholic university types, right? All of them were universally disgusted by that in very much the same way that a David French or a Kristen Kobes-Dumay would be horrified about that version in their own circles.
Oh, like
it's exactly the same pattern.
Beware refusing communion to politicians by their political stances, because this is why Catholicism and democracy struggle. If there is someone who has political authority over an elected politician's conscience, then it messes with the ability of democracy to function in the way that it was designed. And you might say, so much the worse for democracy. I know that there's plenty of people out there in our little court of the internet who think that, but that is what I'm saying, is this is why democracy has a little bit of an anti-Catholicism immune system. Is because if you can get, a whole bunch of people elected into public office and there's someone above them who can tell them what to do at expense of their immortal soul, it harms democracy.
Yeah, but Sam, I don't think that it bothered Nancy Pelosi that much to not.
Oh, right. Which is why it didn't cause a crisis, because she's a Protestant. But and so that's why it was able to work. But that's what I'm saying. Be careful if you go down that road, Because let's imagine that you do, get enough authority over these Catholic politicians. Then people are going to start wondering if I should elect Catholics, because I'm not actually electing the Catholic, I'm electing the Pope or their bishop, or, are they in a conservative bishopric or a liberal bishopric, right? Those sorts of questions come into play when bishops start having authority over politicians voting. So that's part of my point. I'm not saying that Nancy Pelosi is a good representative of Catholic teaching. I'm not defending that. But what I'm saying is the ecclesiology and the political stuff will get complicated if those things get too intertwined.
Well, I mean, I'm a Protestant, and I mean, if she were a Protestant, I don't think she should take communion either. So, to me, I don't think this is limited to Catholicism.
But you think that as your own personal conscience, and if your pastor was telling you things against your own personal conscience, you'd go to a different church.
Yeah, and the Protestants always have that option. So maybe let's say a Californian politician comes to my church and does something, and I say, I'm not serving you communion anymore. You go across the street.
You go across, right. Well, right, and look, to that point, I think, Sam, you do have a point, right? Because I mean, look, we have a closed communion, right?
But they could. I mean, and this goes back to Kale, your earlier point about the variety of Catholics. You could go across the street to the liberal Catholic priest. Okay,
right.
Just like there's, like James Martin will give you communion.
Right. You might even marry.
You can always just fly to the Vatican and get communion to show your bishop what's what, right? Isn't that
right?
What
but Sam, remember the way that the sort of the governing structures of Catholicism work is that the bishop is your pastor, right? Territorially, right? Mm-hmm. The bishop is your pastor, and so the pastor has a unique responsibility and relationship with members of his flock. So now, in the spirit of collegiality, let's say that I'm the bishop of Rhode Island and you're the bishop of Chicago, and I say that this politician can't receive communion, and then that person goes over to your diocese and receives communion from you. That is a violation of sort of the collegiality. But again, technically speaking, you're within your prerogative, to do such a thing. Right. Mm-hmm. So again, I guess the more important point is that there is a low resolution unity, right? And again,
well, that's because Protestantism took your teeth away, right?
But I'm telling on myself here a little bit in my own kind of weakened ecclesiology in the last decade of my life, right? That there's this low resolution sense of unity, but don't put on your glasses, because if you start really kind of poking around, there's some fancy stuff going on that moving things around, and I don't know, there's just a lot. It's a much bigger mess. Certainly it is a much bigger mess in my appreciation of things than it was for me 15 years ago.
And I appreciate what you're saying. I'm saying if it wasn't that kind of a mess, and if the ecclesiology were working as designed, that's where you can see how Protestantism and democracy gets a little bit worried about. And you can even see similar things with Mormonism, right? Similar questions were being asked of Mitt Romney. Well, do your bishops in the Mormon church have authority over you to decide how you're voting? So it's not a uniquely Catholic thing per se.
So then my question to you as a Protestant is this: are you is it really just you? Like in other words, if I press you on, say, an opinion you have, right? I mean,
I've been pressed a lot.
Nobody can be in politics and be married because their wife is good or their husband is good.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, Paul, right? I feel, and maybe this is just a phenomenological argument, but I feel that there's always somebody who catches our conscience, who acts as our backstop, right? And I feel like I'm allowed a certain amount of honesty in that, because I can just say, well, the Pope is the guarantor of orthodoxy, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. So if I really press you, what is your guarantor of orthodoxy as a Protestant man?
the Bible and my conscience is sort of the classical biblical answer, or Protestant answer.
You could drive a Mack truck through that, though.
I know, and what I'm saying is I'm sort of almost over exaggerating the Protestant stance to show that I think there are things about it that are starting to crumble and not work anymore because I agree with the criticisms that you're pointing at.
I mean, because don't you always think that it is a person, though? Like, I know you guys, the person of Jesus. Okay, but like, I feel like there's always like there's a person who like holds that part of your conscience, and maybe I'm making a much larger question or point than just about me and the Pope, say, but like is it my wife? You know, is it my brother? Is it my mom? Like, I feel like. You talk about the two little guys who sort of hang out on your shoulders, like we say it's our conscience, but like, really, maybe I just don't, maybe I believe that there's always a person behind this thing we call conscience.
But now let's, and I think Kale drives us into this space where we've got Steve. So Steve, your friend, Skojek. Yeah. Steve deconstructed, left the Catholic Church. I mean, he couldn't take it anymore. So it's funny. We had the Aaron Wren thing that's like, why are everybody becoming Catholic? Well, and also Orthodox. But it was quite interesting when I watched the guy, the Harvest guy, who was saying, Orthodoxy is gaining people through the Peugeot Peterson, is gaining that. But overall, their population, they're losing population.
Yeah.
And, the Catholics have some of those same dynamics. And we are in a place where I think this is very much the meaning crisis, where your question, Kale, where is there a there? Where do we come from? Is there anything under there? Or did Mike Pence really not eat with women because his wife was insecure? I mean, I said it. I don't know if that's the case or not. I've got no inside information with respect to Mike Pence, but and that sort of, I think, puts us into this. People are saying, oh, poor Bethel can't get a word in edgewise, and I'm thinking, do you really know Bethel? Do you really think if she wants to talk, she's not going to talk?
That's funny.
Little Bethel sitting by the side.
Somebody say that about our combo right now.
Someone mentioned that, but this sort of leads me kind of
Bethel talks when she has something to say.
That's right. The Justin Brierly space right now, and part of the reason I wanted Bethel on here is because she is a walking encyclopedia about so many of these things. I mean, she just there's sometimes I confuse her with the internet because she knows a lot about a lot of things, and so now we're also in this space where it's almost a mere Christianity space. This ecumenism that we're experiencing in the corner. I mean, we sort of handle lightly. I mean, even Sam, the non-Trinitarian, and we've got the Orthodox and the Catholics and the Dutch Reformed, and Bethel is, Anglican is sort of the great wobbly denomination where you can be just about anything.
So if I can contribute a little bit from my own particular Anglican roots are sort of interesting in this conversation because when you say Anglican, that's vague. You really have to kind of get specific and go, okay, well, what kind of Anglican, like where and when? So my particular Anglican heritage is the continuing Anglican heritage. This was a breakaway denomination from the main line in the 70s. They didn't like women's ordination. They could sort of read the tea leaves and see that the main line was sinking leftward. And so then they broke away. They started this continuing Anglo-Catholic Church. So that was when my childhood parish was founded. So then that's where I grew up. And it's this quiet little bubble, really, of Anglo-Catholic worship with the Book of Common Prayer. The 1928 version was what we used, and liturgy and sacrament, where we were just sort of left alone to do our thing. And then very sadly, that parish finally ended last year, and it was tough. I tried to join an ACNA church plant here in Lansing, but sadly they couldn't get off the ground. They had to close. So I'm actually currently attending an OPC church, a Presbyterian church, because it's the sort of closest thing in my neighborhood where I just sort of happen to kind of feel comfortable. And so, and the kind of church that I grew up in is very difficult to find.
But the difficulty, I mean, what's so interesting about this current moment with those who are going into church, it's almost impossible, it seems, to go into church in a way other than sort of in a Protestant mode. You might be going, that's, part of what I've said about the Orthodox. And I'm going to, and Sam, you said the denominationalizing of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, technically they're not a denomination the way all the Protestant churches are, but it's like, there's this menu ahead of,
Yeah, but guys, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm fortunate because I live and work at a monastery that has it's a serious monastery, and they have a solid liturgy. It's nothing fancy, but it's very solid. But I guarantee you, if I didn't live here, I'm sure I'd be driving across town or across the state to go to a Latin mass. I'm just telling you right now.
Right.
Oh no, so, I'm not having any doubts about your.
I'm affirming what you're saying, Paul. In other words,
we're all in this moment we're looking for.
Yeah, we're all in this moment where we're actually all of us are looking whatever labels on the outside of the building.
This is also interesting for me to watch because I'm simultaneously right now looking at friends and acquaintances who are like photo negatives of each other here. Like at the same time that I see people who are fleeing or have fled Catholicism for Orthodoxy or something else. I mean, like literally just had a reader right the other day. He's a Catholic lawyer. He said he's having kind of a Catholic crisis of faith. But at the same time, I've got these Protestant friends, this very energetic young evangelical couple, and they're becoming Catholic. Because they're like, they want to be based in trad. They want to be cool with their, So I'm in a position where I can sort of wave at everybody and wish everyone well where they land because I, in spirit, I'm very Lewisian. I have this kind of ecumenical big tent. Yeah. Can't we all just get along to save babies kind of, political view of things. But I mean, if somebody asked me, I mean, this Protestant couple I know, they didn't consult with me before becoming Catholic, which is fine. They didn't need to. But if they had, then I would have told them honestly what I think, and I would have said a lot of the kinds of things that Kale was saying. Even though Kale, God bless you, Kale, you're still sticking in there, fighting the good fight. But I would have told them, look, I don't know if you're going to find what you're looking for when you get there. Now, I think a lot of this is going to come down to the community where you are. Because it could be that maybe this couple I know, they're going to find a sort of enclave of based tradness in their area, in which case, great. Maybe they can flourish there. Their kids will be happy. But jumping Kale.
So this is really something that's been kind of popping in my head as we've had this conversation. But I think that this is where this whole sort of mode of prophilicity that we've been operating in has to come into question. So Paul, you just got finished saying, right, that the Orthodox Church has been the direct benefit and indirect beneficiary of your Pagios and all this online stuff, right? So loads of people who are flocking to the Orthodox Church, right? But pump the brakes here a little bit, right? Let's look back at the whole thing. There are not legions of people converting to the Orthodox Church right now. There are very selective people who find their way into your consciousness Congress and through this channel and this little corner who are gravitating to these kinds of things. And so much of this stuff takes place in here on this little screen as we're doing it right now. Right.
We might even know most of them.
Literally.
Right? If we saw the list, it would be like, that comment section person, that comment section. Right. Yeah.
And so this is sort of interesting for me because I spend so much, as you know, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, et cetera. And for me, it's an absolute lifeline. It's an absolute lifeline for me. And I'm never going to talk trash about Twitter because it's been really good for me. Like I needed it. It's doing a thing. I'm making real connections to real people. Right. Okay. Period, full stop. But this is not reality, right? And so part of me sort of that Mueller book was really helpful for me because I recognized that I've been kind of playing. Now I kind of knew this, but I really now have language to recognize what I'm doing and what I'm projecting. I would part ways with Mueller by saying that, yeah, but I play a profile in my day-to-day life too. I'm Mr. Zeldon. I am in the front of the classroom. I'm Pastor Paul, right? I mean, we dress up for a living, right? And so we're already playing the profile game from, I know, denim jokes aside, right? We already play roles, right? Now, I'm not a nihilist. I think that Mueller is probably a practical nihilist, and I don't understand that personally. Okay, I do think that there is an underneath reality, thus my work, right? That is meaningful and real in every sense that way. And so my goal is to align whatever it is I'm projecting out into the world with we would say the sort of the spirit of authenticity, and maybe even the spirit of
sincerity or profilicity.
Sincerity, right. And I would just, anybody who goes down the Mueller rabbit hole, it's not necessarily a progression, so just be careful of making it sort of an historical epoch type thing. Right. But anyway, my point here is that with this, we're looking for the meaning crisis, right? It's ultimately an embodiment crisis, right? And so for me, so much of what has sort of kept me from diving full into like my YouTube channel and doing all this sort of stuff is because I reserve this kind of deep skepticism about it as even a place, right? And the only way that I can kind of come to peace with it is that I have to recognize that it is purely liminal. It is purely a portal to get me there and back and there and back and there and back again, right? And so ultimately, does Twitter matter if I'm at Mass in the midst of a liturgy and the priest is censing the altar, right? And am I in a community? So you talked about, your friends who did not consult you, right? But they're probably looking for something that the four of us are not looking for, right? I mean, most people don't do the Twitter thing. Most people don't even do the YouTube thing, right? I think most people go about their lives. And so all of this sort of chatter has to take into account that we're the weirdos.
Yeah. And one thing I think about is I think that we're in some sort of moment that's like Protestant Reformation-esque in terms of the explosion of information and who gets to make their thoughts known, and a breaking down of the establishment organs of publishing and sense making. But one question I have is, where are all the new denominations? Where are all the new kinds of Christianity?
Yeah,
and because there are, like, in the 1500s, right after Luther was nailing on a door, there was an explosion of a bunch of new types of Christianity. Okay, in England in like the late 1600s and 1700s, sort of once England stopped fighting over this stuff, explosion of lots of kind of denominations. The burned over district in upstate New York in the 1800s, bunch of different denominations. The Pentecostal explosion, bunch of different kind of denominations. Okay, so that's like every 100 years or so, Protestantism goes through some sort of, Cambrian explosion of innovation. And then there's normally a bunch of new kinds of churches that have a new kind of name and new leaders that have a new vibe in them. But right now, none of this, I think there are new vibes, but they're not resulting in new institutions. It's sort of like when Ross Douth had asked, why doesn't Marion Williamson found a church? But part of that was back in the day, when there was a new something going on, there was some charismatic teacher leader that was talking to his friends and his family and people in his town, and he got enough people together listening to him. And then, okay, boom, you get 100 people, you can start a church, and it keeps growing, and you start one in your neighboring town, and it goes from there, because the people that you're influencing are real life connections. So it's easy to build a real life institution once that gets enough momentum. But now we're having all of this electronic influencing, and I have no idea who in my real life is actually listening to this stuff, or most likely, like you're saying, Kale, not listening. And so I have almost no ability, or it's extremely difficult to turn this into a real life thing. And like the estuary stuff is like the best we got so far. But I think that's part of why these don't result in new institutions, is the disembodiedness, that it just doesn't leave a very natural, easy path into making a actual new church or denomination.
So I'm going to throw something in here that might be weird, but I've been going pretty deep down the whole ufology hole, rabbit hole, and the Jacques Vallée and the Pasulka and all that sort of stuff. And he had this sort of tongue-in-cheek phrase, right, for this invisible college, right? This invisible college was a kind of loose consortium of secret scholars who were kind of doing this esoteric work, right? And I wonder if something like this little corner is a kind of version of this invisible college. It's very visible if you tune in, right? I mean, it's like, I know Paul has a couple of private things that if you're not a member you can't see, but it's largely very, very visible. But it's sort of hiding in plain sight. And so, are we sort of playing this kind of esoteric role of sense making, where you can come if you want, but the gate, it's not a locked gate. It's just like, it's kind of like a geek gate, right? It's nerdy, talky, what do you always say? Thinky talky, nerd, right?
Well, but I think, Sam's, so one of the things that I look at is, I was watching how many of these influencers now aren't on Rumble, or there's a few of these, like Scott Adams has his thing on Locals or something. So there are these little church-like things, and Scott Adams, Marianne Williamson, these would all be founders of new sects at some point, 150 years ago, and now they're inhabiting this other space. I mean, Grim Grizz is in some ways a cult leader of a tiny little cult, the little Grim Grizz cult. But no, you're right, Sam. But then that leads to the other question of embodiment and instantiation, that these churches, because of the mode that they lived in and worked in, they had a durability that all of the churn in the cyber world is just going to sort of blow away. And this little corner too, I mean, there's a cult-like aspect to this. A really great conversation. It's still behind the membership section. It's going to come out with Neil. But Neil made the point that, the military understands cults. And it's basically what keeps a cult from being a cult is that a cult is really about sort of the tyranny of Jim Jones to get, to sleep with all the women and have everybody kill themselves for him. That's really what a cult is like. And these other organizations, they aren't really a cult around an individual who is basically manipulating everybody for his individual passions. So, yeah. Ooh, I'm in a cult. There you go, Monica.
I'm gonna go touch some grass here. So.
All right. Well, all right. Well, maybe
good to see you, Bethel.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Bethel, for coming in. So maybe it's a good time to transition into the questions. So if any of you want to ask a question, put question in all caps. And if we don't get a lot of questions, don't ask. If you want to come into the stream, don't ask any questions, and then I'll drop the link. Question. Wait, Paul isn't the first part of your communion. This is not the table of living stones. No, and that's the Protestant denomination thing, where Protestants do this weird move of saying the Christian Reformed Church is not the only church. And of course, this comes out of the code of the Reformation. And then of course, now you've got Vatican II, where, I mean, I'm not going to get into, I don't know near enough to get into the weeds of what did Vatican II really say with respect to the uniqueness of Rome. But yeah, and
it's pretty robust.
What's pretty robust?
Its claims.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
it's pretty robust.
And Father Eric asked, why hasn't Bishop Barrett founded a new order? Yeah.
What do you mean by that question? I mean,
well, his so Word on Fire. What is Word on Fire?
Right,
what would Word on Fire be 300 years ago?
I mean, it would have been. I see. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question, Father Eric. Okay, yeah. No, I think I know nothing, of course, so here I am talking. But as I told you, Paul, I think in one of our very first conversations many, many years ago now, it is so weird that Bob Barron is a bishop. It is not the way that politicians climb up the greasy pole, right? He did not play the chancery politics game in order to get that. He may have been named a bishop, and again, I'm totally riffing here. I have no insider information, but he may have been named a bishop so as to keep him in official church, as opposed to becoming a Dominican or a Jesuit or Franciscan or a Benedictine or what have you, right? It may be the case, that was a move similar, I think, to the way that Fulton Sheen was named a bishop. These are not typical political bishops. These are superstars, right? Who get the job. I mean, it's a job, and I don't want to pretend it's not a job, but that's my sense of it, right? That maybe him being named a bishop was the way of keeping him in the official church. Not that Jesuits aren't part of the official church, but you know what I'm saying. Not in an order.
And the Catholic Church has had ways of doing this in the past, of helping find sort of the right context for a particular giftedness. I mean, Bishop Barron is a very unique individual because he is both a world-class theologian, philosopher, and he can talk on camera. And he has a personality. That's a very unusual.
Yeah, no, he's hyper skilled. He's hyper novel, actually. Not novel, but he's unique. Let's put it that way. And I would say that, my suspicion is that what the church thought they could do with Luther was what they were able to do with a very, very different guy in Francis. I really believe that they thought they could kind of make Lutheranism, a Lutheranist order. But obviously it didn't work out that way for reasons that they were not able to anticipate or see.
Yeah.
But I do, because that's how they dealt with Luther's before.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Now, Chad, I don't know exactly. I see you mentioned contestants often. What do you guys think we are that we are no longer Protestants, but we're more like contestants? Is that we're?
I think I know what he means.
Explain it to me.
In other words, is a contestant someone who just literally is if you think of a game show, and a contestant is the guy who's behind a little podium and gets to play Jeopardy. Maybe that's the participatory revolution, right? That we all have a channel, we all have a profile, and this is part of the new digital reality. Is that we're not? We all think we are the star of our own show.
Well, and I think that connects with David Walker's question here. The trend in Protestant churches seems to be taking off the denominational label.
Yeah.
And that's That's a great point in this conversation. Spat says, what does a fox imply? Esotericism and not being honest about one's true beliefs. I don't think that foxes are necessarily dishonest about their beliefs, but it is a tactical move. And as a pastor, I know this tactical move. If you're dealing with someone who is experiencing difficulty, they're acting out, they're not really very, very well in control of things. Often, if you sit down and draw them out and have them talk a little bit, they'll begin to regain control of themselves, because a lot of their frustration is nobody's listening to me, and so I'm going to try to shout because then people will listen to me. And it's settle down, start talking. It's very much a therapeutic move, and in many ways the Fox style of leadership is all about the triumph of the therapeutic, and it's triumphed because it works. Because people, you want to gain an enemy, treat someone poorly. You want to gain an ally or a friend, treat someone well. It's sort of the two ideas of well, here we captured this person from Al-Qaeda and we want to make them talk. One way is to torture them.
Yeah.
The other way is to let their guard down, put them in a nice space, treat them well. Eventually, they'll begin to consider you their friend, and then they'll confide in you, and then they'll tell you their secrets. I mean, it's sort of the other way of, it can be incredibly manipulative, but it's also very powerful.
Well, it's ultimately Luciferian, I should say.
Yeah,
at least in the idiom of Paradise Lost, right? If you look at the 4 speakers in Pandemonium, you've got the total war guy, and then you've got the it's Gavin Newsom is the number 2 guy, Belial, and then you've got the guy who's like, screw God, we're just going to make the best of it here, right? And those are the 3 main. I'm not going to get into the last one, but I think the mode of the fox is the mode of Belial, is the mode of the politician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Upcycle, thank you, Upcycle. Merry Christmas to this little corner from a fringe, virtually not a lone rebel. May next year shower all with blessings and joy. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the context of outdoing each other in love, who's winning? I don't know who the contestants are necessarily. What are our parachurch mini churches? Yeah, sort of. And and one of the interesting things is that, again, the Catholics, the Catholics had all sorts of ways of incorporating that dynamic. And Protestants are very new, and so the parachurch sort of came up to be, they're not exactly churches, but they're sort of like churches. And it's also deeply Protestant, is that they're kind of under the umbrella. Mark Knoll's thesis of the Christianity in America, which is basically that, part of what happens in the American Revolutionary Wars, the British are trying to keep the Americans on one side of the Appalachians. And Americans are like, there's free land out there. And the Indians, we're going to beat them one way or another. And so we want that land. And so part of the American Revolution is get the British to stop, get the British to stop, guaranteeing Indian rights so we can go and, take their stuff. And so what happens is colonization outstrips the institutions of the church. So the Bible itself starts acting sort of like an institution. And that's where in Protestant land you get Bible-believing churches. That's right. And that becomes an implicit guarantor of things. And that's part of what happens with parachurches. All right. Oh, Strange Theology has a question. How broadly can we interpret the body of Christ and stay consistent with 1 Corinthians 12 to 27?
I wish I could rattle off 1 Corinthians 12 through 27, but I'll out myself as
just as a body.
Isn't he
one has
about
many parts.
in tongues? Yeah.
Well, no, it's the body, and it's the giftedness of the body, and it's Paul's metaphor of in other words, don't the different, and we're going to count the Catholics and the Orthodox as denominations, don't these different traditions within the body of Christ also function in the same way that Paul talks about as the Pentecostals do this? It's sort of Richard Foster's streams of living water. You have all these streams, and I see it that way. The Catholic Church does, for the Orthodox, it's liturgy. For the Catholics, it's sacrament. And that's not the reduction of them. For the Protestants, it's preaching. And for the Pentecostals, it's, so there's some of that.
The first part of 1 Corinthians 12 is what the verses right above those verses are the Pentecostal verses.
Yeah. Okay, CW. Could Kale briefly touch on his recent George Bailey moment so we can all reaffirm our own wavering faith in humanity? I don't think you have to.
I'm not ready. I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude. Just shocked, but thank you. Sorry.
We love you, Kale.
Thank you.
On the whole, do you remain hopeful of what Newhouse called a Catholic moment? You better flesh that out a little bit. Richard John Newhouse, right?
Yeah, Father Richard John Newhouse, founder of First Things Convert, from, I believe he was a Lutheran pastor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was Lutheran.
I don't remain hopeful in that way, because I think it was meant in a very specific context that this was kind of a moment that Catholicism would come in and, I think in his worldview, reinscribe and reaffirm the United States of America. So I think it was look, he was a neocon, and he very much believed in that kind of John Courtney Murray, George Weigel view that America was Catholicism, and Catholicism, that was all kind of, I'm just not there personally. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for those guys, but I don't think it means anything in the way that he first uttered those words back in the 90s or 80s, whatever it was. Sorry.
I don't know what to do with Anselman's question. Is it public apostasy to participate in worship of religions that reject the Lord Jesus Christ? Can an apostate still be pope?
So yeah, do you know who Anselman is? I mean, I know him from the comments, but where does he come from? Is he Catholic or no?
I think he's a Scottish. I don't think he quite is SSPX, but maybe close.
Yeah. Okay, so he's on the trad side. Yeah, and of course that's the question, right? Did the Pope worship Pachamama in the Vatican gardens during the synod on the Amazon, right? And therefore, if he did worship this Pachamama thing, which I think the Pachamama thing is a problem. I don't, look, I mean, then you could say the same thing about John Paul II and Benedict, because John Paul II kissed the Quran at Assisi. I mean, I'm not going to win this argument. I don't know. It's a problem, Anselman. I think it's a problem. What do you want from me?
Is the question whether lion or fox is better, or is it an intent to find a third way? Do spiritual realities supersede practical political realities? I think part of the reason WASPy leaders in America adopted the fox posture is because of what Sam noted about the different way that the American empire works. The American empire doesn't work by, Donald Trump in the election to 2016 says, gosh, we conquered Iraq and we gave back all that land. No, that's totally the American imperial way to conquer Iraq and then give it to hopefully a regime that's going to make sure that the oil gets used in ways that are, that American for the most part wants. So it's part of the America is a very foxy empire, and people who are sort of like, no, we should be lions. It's like, yeah, but even after do you really want to occupy Iraq? Very quickly, we decided, look how long we were in Afghanistan, and
right. But Paul, you look at some of the work that Rod Dreher has been doing lately. He's living in Budapest and writing for the European Conservative now, and and one of the things that he constantly talks about, is that he had never fully appreciated the way in which American imperialism worked vis-a-vis the State Department versus the United States Marines. And I think that has always been part of empire building. Armies get the press and the pictures, right? But where the real work happens is when the State
diplomats pick up the phone to each other.
Yeah, and say, look, fly the Progress Pride flag, or you don't get funding. That to me is the bully part of empire that we rarely talk about.
And even I was amazed how long I lived before I had much of an understanding about the Suez Crisis.
Right.
Where basically the French and the Brits are like taking over, and Eisenhower picks up the phone and says, "It's time for you to go.
You don't control the important waterways anymore." Yeah.
And so England and
no
France,
one does, but we do actually.
Sorry, your has-been. We'll call on you when we need you to do something. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think that there's something a little bit like fox and lion isn't maybe quite right as masculine versus feminine power. And the feminine power is sort of the power to seduce. and to set the frame of the conversation. And America has shockingly good feminine power.
Yeah.
And part of the way that America works is that we have just this unending faith in our ability to seduce people just enough to be able to cooperate with us. And like even George Bush was like, all right, once we create the power situation such that democracy can flourish, no one will be able to resist that, and it'll just happen. And it's just these weird structural Saddam Hussein things that are in the way. And so it was like masculine power with the faith that the feminine power would ultimately win. And I think the feminine power, well, it still has a lot of, I'm not going to say it's done, but because there's still a lot of juice left there. But
the shadow matriarch is America.
The shadow matriarch.
So is the American conservatism crypto-Catholic or not? We never answered the question.
It certainly seems to have produced, again, since the council, maybe that might be an easier conversation, Sam, since, say 1965, let's call it, it certainly seems to have produced a lot of the intellectual justification or case for American conservatism, right? Whether that's still true, and I think that's probably what Nate was probably objecting to, Paul. I think that's probably changed a decent amount, the Supreme Court notwithstanding. But man, I think that people need to talk more seriously about the death of neoconservatism as a force. I mean, it's amazing to me, as someone who grew up in all of that it's like dead. I mean, it's like you want to kiss of death, like try to be a young person and be a neocon.
Yeah,
it's just like unheard of. It's just like it just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know where this American conservatism is right now. Sam, what do you got?
I think that's what I was going to say is what's American conservatism right now.
Yeah.
And is Donald Trump, who let's just give him the credit that he's due, is by far the most influential thing in American conservatism right now. Hate it or love it. It's so true. I mean, he doesn't even need to debate anyone, and Nikki Haley can get up to 15% in the polls or something like that, right?
No, it's astounding. It's astounding. And look, and again,
and how Catholic is Donald Trump? What does this crypto-Catholic thing have over Donald Trump? What influence do they have over him? None that I can tell. So,
Nikki Haley would have been an absolute dream candidate 15 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, are you kidding me? A neoconservative woman of color. Oh man, I would have high
with
five
a southern accent. And the
we're going to win by
Christian,
double digits. Whatever.
Garbage.
It's
wow. All right. So, what are your thoughts concerning the church needing to die and be resurrected, transfigured sacramentally with Christ? Unrecognizable.
I mean, this is the question that Peugeot and Vervaeke talk about, where Vervaeke likes it when Peugeot says that the church sort of needs to die and rise again. I think that would be a really big sacrifice that that would cost a lot. And go ahead. Yeah.
No. Keep going.
And I do think that things will change. But I think that Christianity needs a sense of continuity with itself to really be historically credible. And we talk about people flocking to Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Part of what they find attractive is a greater sense of historical continuity and historical self-awareness than the evangelical megachurch that they grew up in. And then, they read church fathers and they're like, what? There's all this stuff I didn't know. And because they were never taught. And so this idea of the church dying and resurrecting, I don't know. I feel like that's that'll only happen once. And that'll cause, when Jesus comes, that'll happen. But I don't think it should happen before then.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'm in the middle of reading Morton's Hyperobjects right now, and it's a really interesting book, Paul. It's like you're listening to a kind of early aughts Delphic oracle. It's very interesting, just in terms of its style and its, associative quality. Anyway, and he makes this funny thing. I don't think he doesn't seem like he's a really funny guy, but I think he's kind of a serious guy. But anyway, he talks, that there have been many ends of the world, and I thought that was a really helpful way to think of things. So at the advent of the gas works in cities, like that's the end of a world. With the advent of electricity and wired homes, like that's an end of a world. And then backwards, you can sort of say, internal plumbing is an end of a world. And so I thought that was actually a kind of a helpful way to think through it, right? So even like in my church, I think it's very safe to say whether you fall into the hermeneutics of continuity or the hermeneutics of disruption, it is very, very clearly the case that the Second Vatican Council signaled an end of a world. And, people can get all upset with me and angry with me with how I'm talking, but exactly what I'm talking about when you say that. So Paul, when your church, for instance, decided, what was it, I think in the late 80s or 90s, to allow ordained women, right? That's an end of a world. Yeah. And so those people who left, I was looking at that interview of that young man who had been part of a separatist group and came back, that was clearly an end of a world.
Yep.
I watched The Jesus Revolution at your behest, and what a great movie. It was really an enjoyable movie, but man, talk about an end of a world. Good Lord. Kelsey Grammer's church before and after, what's his name? It's like, how can you even pretend? And like you said, like the fashion and all of that sort of stuff, it's just like a total break. And so I think that, to the question, we'll continue to do this thing until it becomes actual, like Sam says, at the high risk combos.
I'm totally on the same page as you with that, Kale. I think just the changes I've seen in the Christian Reformed Church over my lifetime, and I've always been at the fringe of the Christian Reformed Church. I've never really been at it, except when I was in college and seminary, more sort of at its.
Well, you were part of the racial reconciliation wing of the church, right? So you were already literally on the fringe there, right?
So and you find, and Sam, we've talked about this before with respect to, was ancient Christianity sex negative? Yes, it was.
Which was mentioned in that video that started this conversation. And Laura, Liz, and I were like, where was our shout out? Yeah. They just said that on a platter. We didn't even.
The Chicago. Do you guys have a real name? See, until you name your group. See, once you name your group, then you can have a shout out. If you don't have a name, how can we shout you out? So, and why aren't you a church? You're not a, it's like when Chad says to me on the bus at Chino, wouldn't it be great if we were all in the same church? And it's like, we can't even all take communion together. But, John Masters, with regard to the Catholic influence over American conservatism, is there a growing antagonism between those actors and Francis due to his apparent progressive orientation?
Can I go?
Yeah, you're the only one who can.
So no, you guys can do it. Like I talk about y'all, so you can talk about it. Anyway, I don't see it as I think clearly the Pope does not like Americans, clearly, and he really doesn't like conservative Americans, and so we can dance this up with theology all we want, but I think the dominant metaphor is that you're a spurned Peronista. I just think that's the frame that you have to see it. That's his frame. He doesn't like Americans, and so I guess he's apparently progressive. I mean, he is. I mean, personnel's policy. Look at all the people he's named. They're all progressives. They all want a new church.
So here's a follow-up sub-question. I don't mean to steal from Monica. What role does America have in the future of the Catholic Church? Because at some point, I really got to imagine that, like, what percentage of the money is America floating in this at the moment? And all of those sorts of questions.
Great question. So the reason why this is even a fight right now is because all the Germans, what's left of the German church, provides the Roman Church with all of her money. Okay, and so they can't quite quit her, right? Because they need that cash.
And Germany has that weird thing where you select your denomination.
That's right.
My sister lives in Germany. You say you can either be Catholic, evangelical, which is Lutheran, and like a couple other things, and then the government tithes for you.
Yeah. So I think, it's crazy.
And that survived through Hitler.
It's amazing. It's truly amazing. But, so I think and that's part of the antagonism of Team France is like the English-speaking members of Team France's, hate the American influence because they feel like, we're making it look bad, for the Americans that sort of playing that kind of game. But I think that the future of the church is absolutely going to be heavily American, despite, sort of what's going on right now. And it's going to be heavily American because, again, even though numbers are waning for everybody across the board, I mean, who's left, right? I mean, who's really going to be left? And you still have a bunch of weirdos like me who still care about this stuff, and I think that there's still plenty of us. How many? I don't know, but Rome's going to need America, and it's really sad. There's no need. It was such an unfortunate turn of circumstances because America has had a great relationship with Rome really since the Council. Prior to John Paul II, that Americans enjoyed a great relationship with Rome, and I thought it was a good and fruitful relationship. It's very weird. This like why pick fights? It just doesn't make any sense.
David French being the water boy for Catholics by bashing white evangelicals.
He's the water boy for the WASPs. Who that's really who he's water boying for. Yeah. I sometimes go on Muslim YouTube channels because they like to talk to me for some obvious reasons, often to, they'll talk about how dumb the Trinity is and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I always have to feel careful. Am I waterboying for the Muslim apologists? And because a lot of them have way bigger channels than anyone else who invites me on, Paul included. And so it is one of those dynamics that I have to be careful with. And the ortho bros will attack me if I go on the wrong Muslim YouTube channels. And I'm like thinking about that as like trying to empathize with David French, because David French, feels like something's going wrong in his church. And in some degree, he's kind of right about the diagnosis, if not right about the prognosis and what to do about it. And so he's being ignored by the institution he wants to help. But this other institution that has ill will for the institution he wants to help will give him airtime. And does that airtime help more than it hurts? I don't know. I'm trying to be nice
or is part of this the Protestant problem that is sort of at the center of this conversation, where David French isn't in an institution. David French is out there in the open sea of evangelicalism, where it's all brokering and networks, and you're trying to find coalitions in order to do a thing. And now he's in a coalition with Rob Reiner to do a movie. This is kind of at the heart of it. Whereas, at least for the Roman Catholics, they're having a fight, and in some ways, who wins maybe when the next pope is named. And I mean, because you guys, more similar to, let's say, the fight within the American political structure, where there is a structure. And so you are fighting for position within the structure. There is no structure that David French is fighting with. David French is out there trying to fight a spirit, trying to fight a hyper object.
Right. Good. Yeah. This is where I think the hyper object thing is actually very helpful. But either of you seen this movie from the mid 2000s? It starred Matt Damon, Robert De Niro, Angelina Jolie. It was called The Good Shepherd. Have you heard about this movie? So it basically, it's a movie. I believe Scorsese even directed it. The movie's okay, but it's basically the story of Matt Damon is a guy who becomes part of the early CIA, and so it really is kind of about the whole the sort of the high point of the WASP establishment and its degeneration post-war, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is because just demographically, right? That you've got all of these Germans and Italian and Irish who are now really
the blacks have their music, the Jews have their religion, the Italians have their family. What is it you guys have?
Right. That's exactly
this
right.
country, sir.
That's right. And we just let you stay here. It's a great line, and I just butchered the line, but he just looks at Joe Pesci in the face and says, "We just let you work, like live here. Like you're just doing your time here. This is our country." And but it really struck me when I saw it way back in the day. And when Aaron Renn started talking about actually Jody Bottom, of course, was talking about with the anxious age, the WASP establishment, but then Renn starts talking about it again. And I just have been unable to stop thinking about this movie. And of course, also kind of in Tucker is part of that world too, in an interesting sort of way, tangentially, that old WASP world. But I'm David French, while not a WASP proper, right? I mean, he's a Tennessee Hill boy, right? There's still that sense that David French played the American game, right? That ultimately and this is where I think, Sam, your line of questioning with me about Catholicism and the uneasy relationship that Catholicism has with American democracy, I think is a real thing, right? And I think for David French, it's like someone attacked his religion, right? And his religion consisted of, robust foreign engagement, at home free markets, and may no one besmirch the good name of Ronald Reagan, right? And I think with the Trump thing that clearly broke his brain and many of these guys' brains, and for some good reason. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he really was attacked, by the sort of the crazy part of the alt-right. I mean, that's a real thing that happened, and I don't want to ever pretend that hasn't been the case. But ultimately, I think you go where people treat you nice, and so I think he retreated more fully and more truly into his actual religion. If we find out what you really are but what is it? Preference. When you choose something, what do they call it? Reveal preference, right? I think it actually just revealed what he really, really was. And he's not whatever modern American evangelicalism is. He's American. Like he was in the army, right? And
but don't say American isn't Protestant, right? Like that thing that I said at the beginning. Those two things are too tightly interwoven.
But you never have an argument for me on that front. Yeah, right. I remember buying the line, that America is an idea and all this sort of stuff. And I get why people say that, and I'm not entirely immune to that frame, but I've been really swayed by the tribes theory of the Scots Irish, the Scots American tribe view of the American founding, and that this was they weren't fighting for ideas, they were fighting because these assholes were coming and this foreign country was coming and messing with us, right? That kind of visceral tribalism, and so to me that is that spirit is Americanism, and that's ultimately what David French is. And I think that it's exposing maybe some of the contradictions in Americanism, but I think that's ultimately what he is.
Where was I going to go with this? Pointing to that movie, The Good Shepherd. I mean, in many ways, Watergate, Nixon's resignation, that was really the end of lie in America.
Right.
And so Jimmy Carter comes in. And of course, Gerald R. Ford from Grand Rapids, Michigan, kind of a transition figure, nice guy, super nice guy, good Christian man, good father, all those things. But Jimmy Carter comes in, and that's at the same time the counterculture.
And we can't even rescue a couple hundred Americans from an embassy in Tehran.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And so in that sense,
and the way they try to do it, like this sort of this secret like backdoor op that blows up, spectacularly. Like you can't even march a division in there. Like just get the totally. Yeah.
But then of course Reagan comes in, and Reagan gives the sense that we still look like lions, and Reagan had some lion in him in terms of in terms of how he dealt with the Soviet Union. But Reagan also had this sense of, if you just get me in the room with the Russians, I'll charm them. And of course, Gorbachev at that point is dealing with a collapsing house and the end of the Cold War. And then at the end of the Cold War, and New Atheism is very much a Fox thing. New Atheism is very against lions.
Right.
So if you follow that strain along.
No, that's cool. I like that. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. No, that's great. That's great.
But yet we can still park some aircraft carriers off the coast of Israel and show what's up is what's up, at least for now. If someone calls our bluff sometime, or if enough people call our bluff simultaneously, I can't help but worry that America will have to really, really choose between fox and lion in the next couple decades geopolitically. Yeah. Like, can we still call the Suez Canal on the phone and be like, excuse me, if you've forgotten, this is ours, in fact, or will the Suez Canal or some other waterway somewhere or some other important infrastructure, geopolitical, whatever, really break free of our power? This will be something that will be really interesting to see how much fight we have left in us and how much fight everyone else does.
Well, China and Ukraine. I mean, both of those questions, and Biden, Biden wasn't supposed to say, we'll defend Taiwan, but Biden, but then again, having to say that at that point, in a sense, reveals weakness as well. Eisenhower didn't go on. Did Eisenhower go on the television networks and tell on the networks, or did he just have to call him on the phone? So, someone wants to, where was the question? Sorry, I can't hit all the questions. There's more questions than I can hit. So someone asked the question. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say. Define evangelical, and is the CRC evangelical?
Well, does someone want to finally tell me if I get to count as an evangelical? I'm still waiting for clarity on this question myself. So I'm probably not the right person to ask, or maybe I'm the exact right person to ask because I've traversed so much of this boundary. I know exactly where it is.
Well, and I've intimated at it, but part of what I've been really Sam, and part of what's inspired me on this is you. Because you're the one who has paid attention to Islam on YouTube and Islamic apologists and this whole thing. And I've dipped my toe into the whole Muslim thing a little bit. But watching this show on Hulu of Rami, just really, so what on earth is a religion? And this gets to your point too, Kale, about, there's no question I visited you, and I never felt as Protestant as when I visited Kale. And we would go into the chapel, and he would, and first it was like the experience that I had when I went to lunch with one of the truck drivers when I was delivering lumber in college, and sat down. We were having lunch together because we were out on a long run, and I just bowed my head in prayer. And what you doing? What you doing? I said, I'm having a prayer. Oh, don't do that anymore. It makes me feel weird. But so Kale, Kale's got the propositional beliefs. He's got Kale is a 4P Catholic. But then when you get into this question of Islam, and I haven't yet sort of brought in, I don't know how many people watched Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein on trigonometry with respect to Hamas. Yeah. And Sam Harris is basically like, kill them all. And Eric's like, But there's a lot of nice people that might be a little sympathetic to, the sorrows of Hamas, and you're going to kill them too.
Can we denominationalize Islam is the question.
Right.
Can we do the Muslims what we did to the Catholics and the Jews? That is the question. And do we have faith in our feminine seductive power to allow them to keep enough of their identity where they don't see what happens to them as they go through this process?
And that's exactly what happens in that Rami, because Rami can't give up the porn. He can't give up hooking up with the Jewish girls and the white girls. And then he decides he's going to be a real Muslim. And then he sleeps with his cousin right before his wedding night with the real Muslim girl. And, and it's all of that tension is, well, can Islam be seduced? And don't forget, Osama bin Laden attacked America because basically what a lot of the Islamists were saying is that America, Hollywood, is seducing the young men of Islam. And they're asking the same, the same question that Kale was saying, will our children be Muslim? And, and so now, depending on who you believe in terms of what's going to happen in Iran, how long will that Islamist regime go on? Or will this whole massive group of young people in Iran finally say, no, we want Western movies and we want to wear what we want? Will they all go Sarah Hyder? So,
Right.
Evangelicalism is a mood and a vibe, and the vibe is dying. It's hard not to see.
Wow. There's a mic drop moment. All right. Anything else? I can't possibly catch up on all the comments. So, CW weighs in with the big bucks. Money talks. I'm going to see the world, then I'm coming back here to go to college and see what I know, and then I'm going to build things. Kale has done George Bailey one better, securing the future of all things by building up people. Bells are ringing. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right. Let's Grail Country. For those of you who watched, we very much wanted to have Nate in, but he had some work conflicts, and so we tried. And so those of you who are coming here for Nate, sorry. Islam is in conflict with modernity and never gave up tradition, and the hardcore tradies should let that sink in. Yeah, but they're and again, to me, this is one of the, and I know Christians have played the lion and eaten lambs countless times over the centuries, but I can't help think that part of what's going on now is, in fact, Islam doesn't have the same DNA in it as Christians do with respect to. So I listened to The Rest is History, 8-part series on the conquest of the Aztecs. Mm-hmm. And Tom Holland keeps reminding us, all of these people who are like, oh, the horrible Catholic, Spanish who did this, that's a Christian objection. They're complaining about Christianity with Christianity. And so I think part of what's happening with this whole struggle with Islam is that every time they kill someone, people who have been deeply formed by the West say, I'm sorry, I just can't sign up for hunting down men, women, and children and killing them in their beds. I differentiate between soldiers and non-combatants, and anyone who kills a civilian for political gain is a terrorist, and I'm not having it. And I think this is part of the Christian DNA that through all of this stuff that we've had in the world has deeply impacted everybody's moral compasses.
I also think Islam is really diverse and complicated. And one thing that I have noticed in my ventures into Muslim land is that when they fight each other with a level of viciousness on the internet that Christians don't do. I mean, I get attacked by Ortho Bros and I get attacked by James White, angry Calvinist, cage stage people. but there's a level of civility that they will still show me that the Muslims don't show to each other when they are fighting.
Yes.
And I found that very interesting. But I think that, I don't know, partly for that reason, the Muslims' inability to solve their own internal conflicts might cause them to see liberalism as a solution.
Right. Sarah Hyder.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly lots of kinds of Islam that I think would be just perfectly fine in Western civilization and American, like, have no problem. There are some kinds of Islam where I'm not so sure. But I think that on the whole, I think that it will be hard for Islam, because really what's been keeping Islam from fighting each other is America.
Yeah.
You know, they would never admit that, but that's true. And so what happens if America stops keeping the Muslims from fighting each other? They'll find that they need liberalism more than actually just about anybody. And so I think that it'll be hard for them to come to the conclusion to not support the liberal project.
No, I agree. I agree. All right, last words, then we'll end the transmission.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys. It's a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, really good. I appreciate all of you. Appreciate Bethel coming on, Nate trying to make the time. And I do think, Sam, that I think that the Islamic question isn't going to go away. And I think this feminine power, both in terms of, let's say, the Whore of Babylon, that America has some of that in it, but also a
little bit Esther, right?
Yep.
Esther, Esther is a good example of the feminine seductive power that could be used for good ends, right?
Yep.
There's the Whore of Babylon, and then there's Esther and Persia. Those are two sides of a similar coin.
That's right. So, yeah.
Well,
anyway,
my closing shot is I just hope that we have generously and productively avoided answering the question directly as much as possible. So that's what I hope for.
Jesuits.
Yeah. Always.
Oh man,
You're funny.
All right, thank you all who
gentlemen.
watched, and see you on the flip side.
All right, see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.